My name is Nora Whitaker. I was 25 years old when my boyfriend of nearly 4 years knelt in front of me on Christmas Day and taught me the difference between someone loving my patience and someone depending on it. Every member of my close family was gathered in my parents' living room. My mother, Michelle, had just started passing around coffee. My father, Paul, was trying to fit one more log into the fireplace. My older sister, Leah, stood near the tree with our aunts, uncles, and cousins crowded behind her. The room smelled like cinnamon, pine, and the dinner we had finished 20 minutes earlier. Then Evan Calder tapped his spoon against his glass. "Can everyone come in here for a minute?" People smiled before he said anything else. They knew we had been together for 3 years and 8 months. My mother covered her mouth. Leah looked at me, and even she seemed ready to forget every reservation she had ever expressed about him. Evan took my hand and guided me in front of the tree. The white lights reflected in his eyes as he lowered himself onto one knee. My heart struck once, hard enough to hurt. He raised a small blue velvet box. When he opened it, the first thing I recognized was the thin gold band. The second was the tiny oval diamond held between 4 worn prongs. It was my grandmother May's ring. It had been inside the keepsake drawer in my apartment. For one suspended second, the question of how Evan had gotten it disappeared beneath what I thought the gesture meant. May had died 2 years earlier. She had been the one person who could sit beside me in silence without treating my quietness like an empty space that needed filling. I had once told Evan that if he ever proposed sincerely, her small ring would mean more to me than anything new. "Nora Whitaker," he said, smiling up at me, "will you marry me?" Someone behind me gave a soft, excited gasp. My mother was already crying. I looked down at the ring and felt my own eyes burn, not because it was expensive, but because I believed he had remembered what it meant. I reached toward him. Evan snapped the box shut, rose, and spat directly into my face. The room went so silent that I heard the fire shift behind my father. Evan curled his lip and held the box away from me. "Ew, this ring is small and pathetic, just like you." The spit cooled against my cheek. My body registered details my mind could not yet arrange. My mother's cup hitting its saucer, Leah taking one step forward, my father saying Evan's name in a voice I had never heard before. Evan glanced around the room as if he expected somebody to laugh. That was the second question, even bigger than how he had taken May's ring. Why had he believed my family would help him turn my humiliation into entertainment? More importantly, what had happened between us that made him so certain I would absorb this too? I did not cry. I wiped my cheek once with the back of my hand and looked straight at him. Then I said, "Before I tell you what happened next, and why the ring in Evan's hand had never belonged to him, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and like this video. If you believe humiliation is not love, even when someone calls it a joke, you are among people here who understand why that distinction matters. No, we're done. Put my ring and my key on the table and get out." Evan blinked. The smile remained on his mouth for another second, but it no longer reached any other part of his face. "Nora, come on, it was a joke." "A joke?" Leah said. "You spat on her." "I barely did anything. She knows I'm messing around." He looked past me toward my parents. "You all know how sensitive she gets." That sentence would once have pulled me into explaining myself. I would have worried that my silence made his version sound reasonable. I would have listed every reason I understood his stress, and every way I might have contributed to the argument we had before Christmas. But the ring in his hand was mine. The key in his pocket was mine. The decision was mine too. I held out my palm, the ring and the key. His expression hardened. "You're seriously ending 3 years over 10 seconds?" "No," I said. "I'm ending it because those 10 seconds finally explained the 3 years. My father stepped beside me without moving in front of me. You heard her, Evan." Evan looked from my father to my mother, searching for the person who would smooth everything over. My mother's face had gone pale, but she did not ask me to reconsider. She took a clean napkin from the table and placed it silently in my free hand. For the first time, Evan appeared to understand that nobody in that room was going to rescue him from what he had chosen to do. He dropped the blue box onto the table, then he pulled my brass apartment key from his key ring. His fingers shook as he worked it loose, but his voice stayed sharp. "You'll calm down tomorrow." I closed my fingers around the key. "Don't come to my apartment." Paul opened the front door. Cold air moved through the living room and stirred the silver ribbon hanging from the tree. Evan paused on the threshold, waiting for me to call him back. I did not. The door closed. The room stayed quiet. Only then did I notice that my knees were trembling and that I had pressed May's ring box so hard against my palm that its metal hinge had left a red line. The spit had taken less than a second. My decision had taken even less. Understanding why Evan thought I would forgive him would take me back 3 years and 8 months, to a crowded birthday gathering where a confident stranger noticed I had nowhere to sit and made room beside him. That was how Evan entered my life, by noticing a small discomfort and fixing it before I had to ask. The birthday gathering belonged to a coworker of Leah's, and I knew almost no one there. I had been standing against a wall with a paper plate in one hand when Evan shifted his chair and called my attention to the empty space. He did not demand that I become louder for him. He asked what I did, listened to the answer, and remembered it when we met for coffee the following week. At 21, I found that kind of attention irresistible. Evan sold cars, and he could make strangers feel as if they had entered a conversation already in progress. With me, he seemed gentler. When a restaurant became too loud, he suggested a walk without making me explain. When I worried that my payroll certification exam had gone badly, he brought dinner to my apartment and waited beside me while I checked the result. He was genuinely kind in those early months. That mattered later, because I spent years using the person he had been as evidence against the person he was becoming. My family liked him almost immediately. He helped Dad replace a rusted shelf in the garage. He remembered which mystery novels Mom enjoyed and arrived at Christmas with a used hardcover she had mentioned once. He teased Leah without becoming defensive when she teased him back. "He's good at entering a room," Leah told me after one Sunday dinner. "Is that a compliment or a warning?" "I haven't decided." I laughed. At that point, there was nothing to defend. The first remark that stayed with me came more than a year later. Evan and I were meeting 2 of his friends for dinner, and I asked the server whether a side dish contained walnuts because Leah had a severe allergy and had recommended the restaurant to me. Evan leaned back and smiled. "Nora checks everything twice. She'd ask for an inspection report before eating a sandwich." His friends laughed. I did too, although the joke made me feel exposed in a way I could not explain. In the car, I told him it had bothered me. "I was bragging that you're careful," he said. "Why do you always hear the worst possible version?" I ended that conversation apologizing for misunderstanding him. The remarks multiplied slowly. My emergency savings became my fear fund. My quietness became proof that I had no opinions until he supplied one. When I received a small promotion, he told friends that I processed paychecks and had begun acting like I owned the company. Each comment was light enough to defend individually. If I described one to someone else, I could hear how minor it sounded. I began measuring my hurt against how difficult it would be to prove. I had practiced doing that long before Evan. Growing up, Leah had been the child who argued with teachers, negotiated curfews, and announced exactly when she was angry. I became the easy one. Mom used the phrase affectionately. Dad trusted me to handle things without being asked. I liked being the daughter who reduced pressure instead of adding to it. Evan recognized that part of me. At first, he praised it. "You don't make everything a battle," he once said. Eventually, the compliment became an instruction. When Leah saw me cancel a family dinner because Evan had suddenly decided he needed me at a dealership event, she asked whether he did that often. "His schedule changes," I said. "That's sales." "Your schedule changes too. Somehow you're always the one moving it." I told her she was judging a relationship she did not live inside. Leah backed away because she respected me. Evan later used her silence as proof that she had accepted my explanation. By our 3rd year, he had begun leaning on me whenever his commissions dropped. I covered more dinners. I paid for a weekend trip after he promised to repay half. I organized due dates when he complained that creditors made everything intentionally confusing. He always repaid just enough to let me call the pattern temporary. The imbalance became sharper after my promotion. It was not a glamorous job change. I received a modest raise and responsibility for benefits enrollment. Evan celebrated by taking me to dinner, but when the check arrived, he slid it toward me and said, "The person with the dependable salary should enjoy using it." I paid because challenging him in the restaurant felt ungrateful after he had planned the evening. On the drive home, he talked about becoming the dealership's top seller and buying a house before he turned 30. His ambitions were not the problem. The problem was that my stability had become a resource in his plans, while my caution became a defect whenever it slowed them down. There were still weekends when we laughed until my stomach hurt. He still called May's old recipes strange and ate 2 servings. When I became sick, he delivered medicine and stayed on the phone until I fell asleep. Those moments made every cruel one seem like an exception. I kept waiting for enough good days to prove which version of Evan was real. I did not yet understand that the question was not which version was real. They both were. The relevant question was which version appeared whenever I said no. Then, in early December, Evan arrived at my apartment carrying a lender's brochure and the kind of hopeful smile that made refusal feel cruel before he had even asked the question. He placed the brochure on my kitchen table and said, "I found a way for us to stop fighting about money." The solution was a debt consolidation loan. Evan said combining his balances would lower his payments and allow us to start planning seriously for marriage. The rate he had been offered a loan was high. With my credit and signature, he said, it would become manageable. I did not refuse immediately. That was important. I told him I would review the documents and consider it if we could build a complete budget together. His shoulders relaxed. "I knew you'd understand." The next evening, we sat at my table with my laptop between us. I opened the lender's disclosure and found a total just over $28,000. For several seconds, I assumed it included interest projections. Then I read the listed accounts. There were 6 credit cards, 2 personal loans, and missed payments from the previous 3 months. "You told me it was around 10,000, I said. Evan looked toward the window. That was before everything got added together. These accounts already existed. Some of them are business expenses. You don't own a business." His face changed, not dramatically, but enough that I recognized the moment he stopped treating me as his partner and began treating me as an obstacle. He closed the laptop. "This is exactly why I didn't tell you every number. You turn money into a moral test." I reopened it. "I'm not co-signing something you lied to me about." "So that's it? I'm trying to fix it and you're punishing me because I was embarrassed?" "I'm asking you to make payments consistently and be honest before I become legally responsible." He pushed away from the table. "You said we were building a future. A future cannot begin with me signing underneath information you hid." For once, I did not soften the sentence after saying it. Evan left without shouting. His silence worried me more. For 2 days he answered in single words. On the 3rd, he sent flowers to my office and apologized for becoming defensive, but he never answered my questions about the accounts. I accepted the flowers. I did not agree to the loan. A week before Christmas, he saw May's blue ring box while I was looking for a necklace in my keepsake drawer. He had seen the ring before, but that evening he asked to hold it. The gold had thinned where May's finger had rubbed against it for 42 years. The diamond was small enough that it never caught attention from across a room. "She wore it every day," I told him. "She used to say it had survived more arguments than most people." Evan turned it between his fingers. "You'd actually want this as an engagement ring?" "If the proposal were sincere, yes. Even though it's tiny, its size is the least important thing about it." He returned it to the box and watched me place it in the drawer. At the time, the conversation felt tender. Looking back, I understood that I had handed him both the object and the exact meaning he would later try to destroy. Evan still possessed the spare key I had given him for emergencies. He had fed my cat when work kept me late and had once brought my laptop after I forgot it. Until Christmas, I had never treated his access as something I needed to monitor. On Christmas morning, he texted that he would meet me at my parents' house instead of riding with me. When he arrived, he was carrying no visible gift and seemed unusually interested in when everyone would be in the living room together. I mistook his planning for nervousness. Hours later, after Dad closed the front door behind him, my body finally stopped cooperating with the calm voice I had used. The blue ring box slipped from my hand onto the carpet. My knees folded, and Leah caught my shoulders before I reached the floor. "I've got you," she said. "You don't have to stand." That was when I cried. The tears came without dignity or rhythm. I pressed Mom's napkin against my face, but I could still feel the place where Evan had spat. Mom knelt beside me, one hand hovering near my arm as though she was afraid touching me without asking would be one more thing taken from my control. "Can I?" she asked. I nodded, and she held me. Dad remained near the door, staring at the key in my fist. Anger tightened his jaw, but when he spoke, his voice was careful. "Do you want us to call anyone?" "Not yet." He accepted the answer. Leah picked up the blue box and placed it on the coffee table. How did he get this? "It was in my apartment." I looked at the brass key in my other hand. He used this. The realization made the room feel smaller. The proposal had not been one cruel impulse. He had entered my home, opened a drawer, taken the one object whose meaning I had explained to him, and carried it to Christmas as a weapon. Mom's face tightened. Has he done anything like this before? My automatic answer rose first. Not exactly. I swallowed it. He's never spat on me. Leah sat across from me. That wasn't Mom's question. So I told them. I told them about the jokes that stopped being jokes whenever I objected. I told them how Evan would stop answering me for days and then return with flowers, forcing me to choose between accepting the peace or restarting the argument. I described the dealership dinner where he told his coworkers I needed a written schedule before I could have fun. I admitted that I had canceled plans with my family because he accused me of choosing them over him. Then I told them about the loan. $28,000? Dad asked. A little over. And he wanted your signature? He said it was how we could start our future. Leah looked down. The dinner you canceled 2 weeks ago, was that after you refused? I nodded. Nobody told me I should have seen the pattern sooner. Their restraint somehow hurt more than blame would have, because it left room for me to recognize how much energy I had spent protecting Evan from people who would have protected me. Mom began to cry again. I kept telling you how thoughtful he was. Because that's what I showed you. You shouldn't have had to make him look safe for us to believe you. Dad sat at the edge of the armchair. I laughed at some of those jokes. So did I. He rubbed both hands over his face. I thought you would tell me if you were in trouble. The sentence might have sounded accusing from someone else. From Dad, it sounded like grief. I didn't think I was in trouble, I said. I thought I was failing at being understanding. Mom looked toward the tree, where Evan had arranged all of us as witnesses. She remembered occasions when I had arrived alone because he was angry, then repeated the explanations I had given her. Dealership emergency, headache, scheduling conflict. None of those explanations had been entirely false. Evan often built pressure from circumstances plausible enough to defend. I told you not to let small disagreements ruin a good relationship, she said. I know. I should have asked whether they were small to you. Leah leaned forward. We can all review what we missed later. Right now, Nora gets to decide what happens next. I noticed the care inside her wording. Leah did not say they would decide. She returned the decision to me at a moment when everyone's anger could easily have taken it. My phone vibrated on the carpet. Evan's name filled the screen. His first message said he was sorry the joke had gone too far. His second said my father had humiliated him. His third asked me to call before I made a decision I would regret. Then came a photograph of the flowers he had apparently bought for me and left in his car. I did not answer. The messages continued. Within half an hour, apology turned into accusation. You rejected me first. You made me feel worthless over that loan. I wanted you to understand what that felt like for once. Leah read the last line over my shoulder. Save that. Another message appeared before I could respond. I only borrowed the ring. You would have gotten it back. You gave me a key, Nora. Stop acting like I broke in. There it was, the reason, the access, and the expectation that my trust excused what he had done with it. My phone rang again, but this time the screen showed Marlene Calder. I almost ignored it. Then I thought she might not know what had happened, so I answered on speaker. Nora, she began, breathless. Evan is devastated. He said a joke went wrong and your family threw him into the cold. He spat in my face. Silence lasted 2 seconds. I'm not defending that. He's under enormous pressure, and he thought you were abandoning him financially. You know how ashamed he gets. I stared at the ring box on the table. His shame does not belong on my face. Marlene lowered her voice. Please don't end years of love on Christmas Day. Let everyone calm down. For most of my life, calm had meant that I stopped asking other people to sit with the harm they caused. I had mistaken the absence of argument for resolution. The relationship is over, I said. Do not call me for him again. I ended the call before she could answer. My hand shook afterward, but I did not call her back. The first boundary had been spoken in front of my family. The second was spoken without them saying it for me. I slept at Leah's house that night, although sleep was not an accurate word for what happened. Every time a car slowed outside, my eyes opened. I kept seeing Evan's hand around May's ring box and imagining him moving through my apartment while I was at work. The next morning, Leah drove me home. She did not take my key or enter first. She waited beside me while I unlocked the door and asked what I wanted her to do. Stay close, I said, but let me look. Nothing appeared disturbed. That almost made it worse. Evan had known exactly where the ring was and had felt entitled to enter, remove it, and leave everything else untouched. My landlord answered my message despite the holiday weekend. By that afternoon, a locksmith had replaced the cylinder. Evan had returned his key, but I no longer wanted safety to depend on whether he had made a copy. I stood beside the locksmith while the old cylinder came free. The spare key had once seemed like evidence that our lives were moving toward each other. I had imagined it becoming unnecessary because we would eventually share one home. Watching the lock change, I understood that trust was not proven by how completely I opened my life. It was proven by what someone did after being given access. When the locksmith left, I went to the keepsake drawer. The space where May's box had rested was outlined faintly in dust. Nothing else was missing. Evan had not searched randomly or taken something valuable to sell. He had chosen the one object I had told him could represent commitment and used it to demonstrate contempt. I opened the box and checked the ring closely. The prongs were intact. The thin band was not bent. I felt relieved, then ashamed of feeling relieved about metal when my own face still felt raw. Leah seemed to understand without asking. It matters because she mattered, she said. I returned the ring to the box, and because he knew that. While the locksmith worked, Leah and I changed passwords. I removed Evan from my streaming account, my grocery delivery profile, and the shared calendar where I had organized his appointments beside mine. I disabled location sharing that I had forgotten was active. Each task looked embarrassingly small on the checklist Leah made, yet every one closed a door I had once opened willingly. Evan had left a jacket, 2 pairs of shoes, a game console, and a box of dealership awards in my apartment. Leah photographed each item while I packed it. We sealed everything instead of giving him a reason to claim I had damaged or withheld something. You've thought of everything, she said. That's what I do when I'm scared. Leah put down the tape. Then I'll remind you to eat while you think. She made toast in my kitchen, and for 10 quiet minutes the crisis became 2 sisters standing over a counter. Her support did not require me to perform recovery for her. By evening, people outside my family had begun contacting me. A mutual acquaintance asked whether I had really rejected Evan because the engagement ring was too cheap. Another said Evan was telling people my father had threatened him after a proposal prank went wrong. The story was clever because it used something true, the ring was small, to disguise everything important about it. My first impulse was to publish every message. I wanted one post large enough to make his version impossible. Then I imagined spending the next week refreshing comments while strangers decided whether spit counted as violence and whether my tone sounded grateful enough. I did not owe the public a trial. I replied only to people who contacted me directly. I told them 3 facts. The ring belonged to my late grandmother. Evan had taken it from my apartment without permission, and he had spat in my face in front of my family. I did not interpret those facts for anyone. Most people stopped asking questions. 2 apologized, 1 never responded. When I returned to work, Camille met me by the elevator with coffee. She had heard only that I had ended my relationship on Christmas. "Do you want to tell me, be distracted, or have me make sure nobody bothers you?" she asked. "Can I choose all 3 at different times?" That's why I offered a menu. I told her enough to explain why I kept checking my phone. She did not ask why I had stayed. At lunch, she talked about a payroll conversion we both hated, until I felt briefly like the version of myself who existed before everything became evidence. Evan called from 3 numbers that day. I blocked each one. His emails moved from apology to anger in the space of an hour. He promised counseling in 1 paragraph and accused me of destroying his reputation in the next. On December 28th, I sent 1 final email. I stated that the relationship was over, that he was not permitted to visit my home or workplace, and that any necessary property exchange would occur through a third party. I saved a copy and did not answer anything afterward. For 2 days, the messages slowed. My body began mistaking quiet for safety. On the 3rd afternoon, I left the office and saw Evan waiting near the employee entrance. He stood beside the path to the parking lot with his hands in his coat pockets. He had shaved, worn the sweater I once told him made him look trustworthy, and positioned himself where I could not reach my car without passing him. I stopped inside the glass doors. Camille followed my gaze. "Is that him?" I nodded. "We can call security." Part of me still resisted the word. Security belonged to emergencies, and Evan was simply standing there. That was how my mind reduced danger, 1 frame at a time. "I'll tell him to leave," I said. "Stay where you can see me." The moment the door opened, Evan walked toward me. "Finally," he said. "You've blocked every way I have to explain. I told you not to come here. I need 5 minutes." "No." I turned toward the employee entrance. He moved sideways and caught the door before it closed, placing his body between me and the handle. "You don't get to erase me after almost 4 years. Move away from the door. Not until you listen." The charm he had prepared for the meeting vanished. His voice was low, but his jaw had the rigid look I recognized from the night I refused the loan. Camille opened the inner door and called my name. A supervisor from the loading office approached behind her. Evan looked through the glass, then back at me. "So now you need an audience for everything? You chose my workplace." The supervisor told him he was on private property and had to leave. Evan lifted his hands as if everyone else had become unreasonable, but he stepped away. Before walking to his car, he looked at me and said, "You're making this uglier than it has to be." I remained inside until his car left the lot. My knees shook exactly as they had after Dad's front door closed. This time, I did not wait for my body to calm down before taking action. Human Resources preserved the entrance and parking lot footage. My supervisor documented what he had witnessed. Camille wrote down the time, Evan's position, and the words she could hear through the door. When the HR manager suggested an incident report with the police, shame rose through me so quickly that I almost refused. "He didn't hit me," I said. She looked at me without judgment. "You told him not to come. He came, blocked your access, and would not leave until other people intervened. You do not have to wait for something worse before creating a record." At the police station, I kept trying to shorten the story. The officer taking the report repeatedly brought me back to dates and actions. Christmas Day, the spit, the ring, the messages, my written notice, the workplace appearance. Facts took longer to state when I stopped shrinking them. Dad and Mom provided statements about Christmas. Leah described Evan's words and the ring box. The workplace supplied the footage. I exported the messages instead of relying on screenshots alone. The officer gave me information for a local domestic abuse advocacy service. I nearly left the paper on the desk because I still associated that phrase with injuries more visible than mine. Camille folded it and placed it in my bag. You can decide later. Just don't make the decision because you think someone else deserves the service more. I called the next morning. The advocate did not tell me what to do. She explained options, asked whether Evan had access to weapons, reviewed my home and workplace safety plans, and helped me understand the difference between a criminal case and a civil protection request. For the first time since Christmas, information reduced fear instead of increasing it. Filing still felt like announcing that my private judgment was not enough. I worried Evan would say I had planned to ruin him from the moment I rejected the proposal. I worried a judge would see a bad joke, an emotional ex-boyfriend, and a woman escalating a breakup. The advocate asked one question. If he respects your decision tomorrow, what does the order take from him? Nothing. And if he doesn't? I understood. I completed the application. A temporary order limited Evan's contact while the court scheduled a fuller hearing. When I received the stamped pages, relief did not arrive as triumph. It arrived as exhaustion. I went home, locked the new deadbolt, and slept for 11 hours. The quiet that followed felt unnatural at first. I had become accustomed to Evan's name appearing on my screen, followed by the rapid mental calculation of which answer might prevent his mood from getting worse. The temporary order removed the messages, but my body continued preparing for them. At work, I checked the entrance each time someone crossed the lobby. Camille began walking with me to the parking lot, then gradually let me decide when I no longer needed it. HR moved my photograph out of the publicly visible staff directory and instructed reception not to confirm my schedule. None of those steps made me weak. They reduced the number of decisions fear had to make for me. Dad offered to install an additional chain on my apartment door. My first instinct was to accept anything that made him feel useful. Instead, I told him the new deadbolt was enough and asked if he would help repair a loose kitchen cabinet. He arrived with tools and did not mention Evan for most of the afternoon. When the cabinet hung straight again, Dad said, "I'm learning that helping isn't the same as taking over. I'm learning that saying no to help I don't want doesn't mean I'm rejecting the person offering it." That lesson reached further than Evan. It began changing the way I understood every close relationship. The hearing took place several weeks later in a small courtroom that looked nothing like television. There was no jury, no dramatic crowd, and no single piece of evidence that transformed the room. There were fluorescent lights, folders, a judge asking precise questions, and two people offering incompatible meanings for the same sequence of choices. Evan wore a dark suit. He did not look at me until the hearing began. He described the proposal as a foolish attempt to make a point after an argument about money. He admitted spitting, but characterized it as brief, unserious, and immediately regretted. He said his workplace visit was an effort to achieve closure because I had blocked him without allowing a conversation. "I never threatened her," he said. "I loved her. I still do." Months earlier, that sentence would have rearranged my understanding. I would have searched for the loving intention underneath every harmful action. At the hearing, I finally understood that love offered as a defense could become another demand. Judge what I felt, not what I chose. When it was my turn, my mouth went dry. I looked at the notes the advocate had helped me organize, then set them down. I explained that I had already given Evan a clear answer on Christmas. I described the spit without adding adjectives. I identified May's ring and explained how he accessed it. I described the written instruction not to visit my home or workplace. I explained where he waited and how he blocked the employee door until coworkers approached. Evan shook his head several times. I did not argue with the movement. The judge asked why I had not reported the Christmas incident immediately. "Because I was still measuring whether it was bad enough," I said. "When he came to my job after I told him not to, I realized he was using my hesitation as permission. The sentence was not polished, but it was complete. Leah's statement and the workplace footage supported the sequence. Evan's messages supplied his own explanation for wanting me to feel rejected. The court did not have to decide whether every moment of our relationship had been abusive. It had to decide whether his recent conduct justified protection. The order was granted. Evan was prohibited from contacting me, approaching my home or workplace, or using other people to pass messages. The order did not declare him permanently evil. It did something more practical. It made my refusal enforceable even when he did not respect it. Outside the courtroom, Marlene stood beside him. She looked at me as though I had taken something from her family. I felt the familiar urge to explain that I had not wanted any of this. I let the urge pass. The property exchange occurred through designated third parties. Leah delivered Evan's sealed boxes and photographed the handoff. A friend of his returned the few things I had left at his apartment. There was no final letter hidden among them, and no private meeting disguised as closure. The loan papers remained unsigned. Evan's debt did not become worse because I attacked him. It simply remained his because I stopped volunteering to absorb it. Safety created space for feelings I had postponed. During the first counseling session, I spoke confidently for 10 minutes and then apologized for taking so long. The counselor noticed before I did. "You paid for this hour," she said. "You don't have to make yourself smaller inside it." I cried harder at that than I had expected. Recovery did not move in a clean upward line. Some mornings I felt lighter before I remembered why. Some nights a knock in the hallway sent me away from my own front door. I missed Evan occasionally, especially the early version of him who brought dinner while I waited for an exam result. Missing him did not alter the record of what he chose. That distinction became one of the most difficult things I learned. I did not need to prove every kind moment had been counterfeit. The relationship could have contained real affection and still have become unsafe. Leaving did not require me to rewrite the beginning. It required me to accept the ending. For a while, I believed closure required knowing whether Evan eventually understood. I imagined an apology arriving through an approved channel, one that contained no excuse and asked for nothing. Then I recognized that I was still assigning him the final line in a story he no longer had permission to enter. The order's silence gave me no information about whether he attended counseling, blamed me forever, or told new people a cleaner version of Christmas. At first, not knowing felt unfinished. Gradually, it became freedom. His private interpretation could not change my lock, place his debt beneath my signature, or put the ring back in his hand. Counseling also helped me separate forgiveness from reunion. I did not have to feed anger every day to keep the boundary valid. Some weeks I barely thought about Evan. Other weeks, grief returned because a song or restaurant reminded me of who we had been. Neither response opened the door. A boundary did not require constant rage. It required consistent meaning. My family changed alongside me, although none of us became perfect. Mom sometimes began a sentence with a suggestion about forgiveness, caught herself, and asked what I needed instead. Dad stopped insisting he should have known everything. He began asking direct questions and wading through answers that made him uncomfortable. Leah and I argued once when she suggested checking my apartment before I entered. "I need this to feel like my home again," I told her. "Not a place everyone else clears for me." She bristled, then nodded. "Tell me how to help without taking over." "Walk in beside me." So she did. Camille made sure our friendship did not become organized entirely around Evan. She invited me to ordinary lunches, complained about work, and once spent an hour helping me choose curtains without using the afternoon as a metaphor for rebuilding my life. Ordinary life was not a lesser ending. It was the first thing coercion had taken from me, and the thing I most wanted back. By spring, I could leave my phone in another room without imagining 10 missed threats. By summer, I stopped checking the parking lot from an upstairs window before leaving work. The protection order remained active, but gradually it became a safeguard rather than the center of every day. I kept May's ring in its blue box for months. The first time I tried to wear it, I felt Evan's fingers closing the lid and removed it immediately. I worried that he had permanently attached himself to it. My counselor asked what the ring had meant during the 23 years before Evan used it. The answer came easily. May's kitchen table, her hand over mine, the faint groove the band left on her finger, and the way she never treated quietness as weakness. Evan had held the ring for a few days. May had filled it with 42 years. In December, Mom called to ask how I wanted the family to handle Christmas. She offered to move dinner, cancel the photograph, or let the day pass without mentioning the previous year. "I want Christmas at home," I said. "The usual time. Are you sure?" "I'm sure I want the choice." The morning of the gathering, I opened May's box. The hinge had left no permanent damage from the way I had gripped it the year before. I cleaned the gold gently, slipped the ring onto my right hand, and waited. My chest tightened. I did not remove it. At my parents' house, the tree stood in the same corner. Dad had arranged the logs badly again. Mom passed coffee in the same white cups. Similarity did not erase what had happened. It gave me a chance to experience those things without him controlling their meaning. Nobody watched me as though I might break. Leah hugged me, then complained that Dad had overcooked the potatoes. Dad asked about work without turning the question into a check on my emotional condition. Mom noticed the ring and touched her own chest, but she let me decide whether to discuss it. After dinner, she brought out the camera. The previous Christmas had produced no family photograph. For years, I had thought those pictures proved we were happy because everyone managed to look happy for 1 second. Now I understood that a photograph could record a moment, but it could not create the truth around it. "Do we want to do this?" Mom asked the room. She was looking at me, but she had asked everyone. "Yes," I said. We gathered near the tree. Leah stood on my left and Dad on my right. Mom set the timer and hurried into place. Just before the light flashed, Leah whispered that Dad's sweater made him look like a decorative cushion. I laughed at the exact moment the camera took the picture. In the photograph, May's small ring caught one point of light on my right hand. No one seeing it would know what it had survived or why I had chosen that finger. They would not know that a man once used its size to tell me I was insignificant. I knew. Small did not mean empty. Quiet did not mean powerless. Calm did not mean available for mistreatment. Evan had expected one cruel performance to reduce me in front of everyone I loved. Instead, it ended the private performance I had been maintaining for him. The most important decision I made that Christmas was not to humiliate him back. It was to believe what he had shown me before he could explain it away. I never needed him to agree that leaving was justified. I never needed Marlene to understand. I never needed every mutual acquaintance to choose my version. I needed my key, my ring, my voice, and the right to decide who could reach me. The camera flashed. My family relaxed around me instead of posing harder. I looked down once at May's ring, then back at the people beside me. For the first time in years, my calm belonged entirely to me.